Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. I am here today with Pete Gabor. He is the Business Development Manager for Water Automation for Emerson.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being on the call. So we wanted to talk a little bit about automation right now and some of the benefits that automation can bring. Can you talk a little bit from a high level what those benefits generally are?
Yeah, of course. Really, we look at, three different categories, really. We want to safely reduce costs. We're always looking to reduce risk and maximize equipment uptime and process uptime. So those are the big three categories. And
Hmm.
fundamentally, automation enables the technology, allows the operators kind of to focus on more high level things, and the automation system allows kind of the repeatable, predictable tasks to be taken care of, by the software. And obviously, as technologies progressed and things have moved forward, that bar has kind of been raised a little bit, and more and more sophisticated tasks are taking place. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, our role as an automation and an OEM provider is really to provide the tools for operators and plant maintenance personnel to for the lowest O&M cost. Obviously, safety is a big component of this,
Hmm.
and we're really trying to keep them out of the news and operate safely within limits. So, that's our big goal, really. Um,
Yeah,
but re-
well,
Go ahead.
it's and just to touch on, I mean, automation in its own right also streamlines their workflow too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that a lot of times what we found is those different software packages and components that are almost little islands. And there's been bridges that are keep being built, and the bridges are getting a lot stronger, and data transmission to all these different platforms is obviously taking place a lot more. Um,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of challenges that are happening in the industry. Electricity costs and chemical costs are certainly going up over time. Knowledgeable people are walking out the door with sometimes 20, 30, 40 years of experience that
Hmm.
if you don't do the right things and take the right steps, they're taking that with them. And then plants, the United States as a whole, a lot of the build out took place decades ago, with the exception of some high growth areas of the country, and they're starting to show their age. And a lot of times, plants were designed with technology that didn't exist, and where they're finding ways to have to retrofit and add on to things, and that takes a little bit more methodical approach, actually. So instead of
Hmm.
starting from scratch, you can't really do that. You have to keep the plant running, and you're building onto it.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the big, challenges that we hear from a lot of utilities is their rates can only be increased so much. They have to go to the utility commission and ask for that. And so what we're trying to do is help them offset those rates by, finding ways to find more efficiencies and help them cut costs where we can.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously, I touched on those employees that are walking out the door. They don't get up to speed, overnight. And by the time you backfill, that's going to take some time to get up to speed. So we're trying to
Hmm.
find ways to implement software and automation solutions to kind of sit behind them and silently observe, all that tribal knowledge that they take with them, and embed that into, the platform going forward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So
yep.
when you're doing that kind of thing, obviously implementation becomes a critical component of introducing something like this to a system. Could you talk about some of the steps that are necessary to have an effective automation system put into place?
Yeah, in the technical part is one component of it, but a lot of it's a very human component just to integrate these systems. And what we found is the most successful projects we've had have had participation from the plant and all the stakeholders. The more
Hmm.
participation we've had from them, the better product we've had. We've had projects where it's people have kind of taken a hands-off approach, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the back end because they're suddenly taking an interest later on in the project. So the big component is human interaction. Obviously, we want them to embrace that almost as a way of life, and just kind
Hmm.
of accept that all these tools really are there to help them and make their job a lot smoother just by integrating them. um, So we're always trying to find new control strategies. We've had the luxury to work with a lot of larger cities, at least from our perspective, and we kind of leverage all those best practices and share them with even the smallest, less than 1 MGD plant. We
Hmm.
take a lot of that best practices that we've learned to help them with that. But a lot of it, you got to understand who the stakeholders are. There's a lot of different people that may be using the system, a lot of non-traditional users. We see a lot of data requests, for example, from data scientists from various facets of, whether they're a university student or, an employee for the city or utility. And we want to understand how they use that system, and we want to make that data available to them as easily as possible without burdening the operator or the maintenance technicians. We're seeing that happen quite a bit.
Hmm.
So that's always a big thing we want to take into account. There's a lot of different documentation we found that it's in the plant, but it's physical. Like, for example, standard operating procedures, instrumentation drawings, all these
Hmm.
different things where if you have an issue, there's time that needs to be spent to go and do an archive and pull that data out, pull those drawings out and compare it. Uh, what we like to do is link all that together. So, all that information for a tag, for example, if you have a problem, what instrumentation it is, when it was calibrated last, all that information comes to you at your fingertips. So we try to spend some time, pulling all that together. We like to, a big component that I think is a lot of people kind of overlook is you got to plan for the future. It's not like you're buying a, a tractor or something. This is a living, breathing, piece of software that is constantly being updated. A lot of these people, a lot of the employees at the staff are very bright, and they're always finding ways to get a little bit more out of the system, to cut costs and make it a little bit more reliable. So you got to plan for that. You got to just accept the fact that it's going to change. Everything's going to, probably be modified at some point in the future, and you just got to accept that and make provisions so that it's easy to do that.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of standards. So, the way a lot of these utilities work is things go out to bid, and there's different organizations that are going to be, modifying the system or have their hands in it. And you want to make that as structured as possible. Everybody has kind of their best way of doing things, and which is fine. But when you have 20 different, best way of doing things, it gets a little bit unwieldy long term to manage. So
Hmm.
by having some standards and best practices in place, it really makes it, from a long term maintenance standpoint, a lot easier to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, talking on maintenance too, one of the
yeah.
things that Emerson has mentioned a lot before is that you can use these systems for machine health purposes. Could you talk a
Yes.
little bit about how you can do that and what types of benefits that can bring to a utility?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bunch of different ways. I mean, if you're talking about rotating equipment, what Emerson has done is we've spent a lot of time taking that technology. We're a rather large organization, and we have subject matter experts who are very good at rotating equipment, for example. We've embedded that technology into our platform. And, what we're trying to do is really provide context to a lot of this information. Whether you have a value, whether it's a 1 or a 5, without providing context, you don't know if that's good or bad, or if it's just okay, or what. So what we've done is we've taken a lot of that software, tried to take some rather complex ideas and make it a lot simpler for users to understand, and kind of get a better insight into things. The earlier we can, we have a peak view technology, for example, that gets embedded into our system that makes it very easy for someone to say that if there's a problem, even though the overall vibration, for example, on a rotating equipment looks okay, there could be an underlying problem there.
Hmm.
So we provide all these things, and it's very easy to understand for an operator to say, hey, there's an issue someone should go look at. And unfortunately, with vibration, it usually doesn't get better. Usually gets a lot worse. So it's kind of a one directional symptom, I guess. So the earlier you can catch that, the better off you are. And
Hmm.
Emerson, we have a lot of process. We make a lot of instrumentation and things like that. What we found also is a lot of plants, they've developed things where maybe the technology didn't exist at the time for measuring certain parameters, and maybe the plant was just built, or different processes were built to control the process, but not really to understand the health of the asset or the health of the process. So there's invariably additional instrumentation that needs to be added, really to just look at that overall health of the process. And it
Mhm.
allows it to control it a lot better, and kind of find these underlying problems and find better ways to control things.
Yeah. So then, that kind of leads into the other aspect of efficiency and reliability. Um, could you speak a little bit to that? Like, how does automation fit into those two key terms that I know a lot of utilities are constantly referencing in there?
Yeah, right. So, that fits into one of our, those principles at the beginning. We want to reduce cost, and we want to, reduce risk and maximum uptime. So all those different things kind of feed into that. I like to think of like the eco button in some of these new cars, where you hit the button, you don't get the best performance, but you get the best gas mileage. So you're using less amount of gas, and you're putting less wear and tear on your vehicle. Very similar application can be implemented into a control system where, you know, day to day, you want to run at the right set point, or you have a bunch of different pumps in a train. We say, if you run at these different, values and speeds, this is the most efficient way to transfer water from one place to another. And it puts the less strain on your system. So we have a similar sort of application there, where you can say, hey, from an economical standpoint and performance standpoint, we're just going to let things use the least amount of electricity. But if you have maybe a very high on a water distribution system, where you have a lot of strain on it, or on a wastewater or a collection system, you have a wet weather event, that obviously can be overridden, and all bets are off, because you want to operate within permit. So that's
Hmm.
part of it. Vibration, I touched on that. Um, and we also have different ways of just giving the operator, if they're not completely comfortable with an automation system, at least just give them some pointers and say, hey, your wet well level, if you just ran it at this set point, if you just set it and controlled it to here, you could use the least amount of electricity, or you put the less
Hmm.
strain on your pumps. And we're not taking over control from them. If they're not comfortable with it, we certainly could, but at least they
Hmm.
know that, hey, here's some general guidance that if you operate within this boundary, you can save the most amount of electricity, and you know kind of keep your assets working for a while.
Yeah, that kind
But
of like direct guidance I think is like so critical and so helpful because for a lot of people, they may like recognize, oh yeah, this is all very beneficial. This can totally help us out, but I just don't know how to do it. And sometimes just saying, here's the number, just stick to these numbers, see how it performs, and then adjust based on this.
yeah,
And that can be
absolutely.
like a huge help for someone who's really struggles with something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, a lot of these system plants have, CMMS systems, where they enter their work order, or maintain their spares on hand. By
Hmm.
integrating that, you're saving a step for an operator. And
Yeah.
that, we find that very valuable, because a lot of times, if you're doing data analytics, you want to look at your work order data to see when things failed. But if someone can't get to entering that work order for a couple days or a couple hours, it's really hard to correlate that data manually. So
Hmm.
by automating that, it makes it a lot easier. It saves time on generating a work order, obviously, or at least prompting that to be done manually. And then the people that are actually trying to find those symptomatic and underlying issues and all those different parameters, it makes it a lot easier for them as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time today. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on that we didn't get to?
No, I think we touched on a lot of different things. I mean, obviously, we could spend days and days here. We are seeing a lot of issues in the industry, and I'd like to share one story that I had talking to one
Hmm.
utility. Um, so we were talking to them, and they had hundreds of pump stations, and they kind of put things into perspective by saying, they have these pump stations. They're The average age of them is about 30 years old, and they said, think about like having a fleet of cars, hundreds of cars. The average age is 30 years old, and they're running 24/7. They say, you have a budget to repair and replace two of them a year. Which ones do you pick? So they've kind of come to us and said, how do we do that? So,
Hmm.
fortunately, there's a lot of technology out there to help them make those business decisions for them, and
Yeah.
really prioritize and say, hey, if you do this, you'll save the most amount of money, and hopefully you can pass on that to your ratepayers, or allow you to
Hmm.
make other improvements within the organization.
Yeah, can
So,
create that long-term plan that makes the most sense for you and your utility.
yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks
So,
so much. Appreciate your time.
okay, thank you.